Today's guest is a Javelin world champion who has been representing Australia on the world stage since the 2014 Commonwealth Games. Her crowning moment so far, anyway, has come in 2019 when she won the gold medal at the Doha World Championships with an incredible throw in her final throw of the final, and she's already booked her ticket to the Tokyo Olympics. I'm delighted to be joined by Kelsey-Lee Barber. Kelsey, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to the chat.
Well, obviously you've got such a long list of achievements already, but I want to go right back to the start. You were born in South Africa. I believe you came over to Australia sort of around the time of the Sydney 2000 Olympics. Can you talk to me about coming over to Australia and what role sport played in your childhood?
Yeah, of course. It's quite exciting sharing, I guess, a little bit of my heritage. And most people don't know that I was born in South Africa and moved out when I was 9, so year 2000. And yeah, it was a really significant year for Australia, for sport, and really, really fond memories for myself in terms of the first time I really got a chance to understand what the Olympic Games were and what it meant to be an Olympian, and that there's big event that's held every 4 years where athletes from around the world come together in this amazing sporting environment. So I think that for me, like reflecting on it, really was a pivotal moment in my life where I sort of understood that that was a career I could pursue, was to be an athlete and represent my country on the international stage at the biggest sporting event in the world. And yeah, that was sort of set in stone from there. That's what I wanted to do with my life.
Even though you were only 9, what sort of impact did it have? Like, do you still have fond memories of specific moments of those games from your childhood?
Oh, not. I can't recall like watching specific events or people. I just remember like a few really big names from the era, and like Kathy Freeman. I mean, especially being part of athletics, that is one name that just like stood out and obviously like resonated around the 2000 Sydney Olympics. And then I mean, you still had like Ian Thorpe and Grant Hackett at the time. So yeah, some big names in sport. And as a young child, still like kind of sussing out the world of sport, I distinctly remember those names coming forward and sticking with me through early days of my career.
I was reading on the Australian Olympic website that you were living in sort of rural Victoria out on a dairy farm with your uncle and your aunt. Sort of, what role did that play in your childhood? Did you have plenty of responsibilities out on the farm, and how did those on the farm, and how did those sort of intertwine with sport growing up?
Yeah, so I actually lived in town, and my aunt and uncle lived on, or they still live on the dairy farm. So I was more of a townie, I guess. So I was, yeah, probably still very lucky that I got to play a lot of sport in town. And I think that's where my development as an athlete really took off, because I got the opportunity to play winter and summer sports, and I guess being in a country town are very distinct seasons. So it meant that in the summer I would swim every night, I'd do gymnastics, and I'd play tennis. And then in the winter you'd cross over and it'd be more like your cross country and netball were the big like winter sports for us. So I'm really thankful for the opportunity to kind of do everything and experience everything. And I think my body got the opportunity to learn a lot of different skills from those sports. I think from the farm perspective and the lifestyle I got to experience living in rural Victoria was that there was just a sense of freedom and the sense of opportunity to just like try everything and have a go at everything. And that was definitely like being thrown on a farm coming from the city in South Africa. There was a whole array of new things for me to try and yeah, again, the lifestyle that you kind of experience, it's, you get in, you get the job done, you do the hard work, and yeah, you can find that side of it really enjoyable. So I still to this day love visiting the farm. We try and get there for Christmas, and yeah, you can sort of like step back from the world a little bit and just soak in life.
Obviously, athletics is the sport that I guess captured you in the end, but you mentioned a lot of other sports there. Was there ever a time when you thought maybe a tennis or a netball, like you mentioned, would be the sport for you, or was athletics always kind of the goal?
No, I think athletics probably was probably on the second on the tier for a little while there. I really enjoyed playing netball, and for a long time that was sort of the sport I was pursuing, I guess, trying to make teams and see how far I could push that. And yeah, then I guess when we moved to Canberra in 2007, I took up athletics with a coach, and at that point in time I was a discus thrower, so I hadn't even really found javelin yet. I sort of, discus was my event and that's what I was doing, and then because it was a throws group, I guess I dabbled a little bit in the shot put and picked up a javelin every now and then. But then when it came to the competitions is when I would start entering in multiple events, because I didn't just want to do one event at the comps. I was still young. I still had lots of energy. I was still very enthusiastic about the sport. So it was like, oh, well, I'm just going to put my name down for these other events. So yeah, it wasn't until a little bit later that javelin became my main focus. But I played netball right up until 2014, like the year I went to Commonwealth Games. And yeah, early days, I think I was 16 and I had someone tell me like, oh no, you need to pick now. You need to decide which one you want to do. And I mean, I still love them both, and I didn't want to make that decision yet. I still have passion for both of them. So yeah, I went against a few people's advice to kind of pick one sport. And when I was ready, I made the decision, and I felt really happy stepping away from netball because I knew I had ambition and big goals in athletics that I felt really confident I could achieve. And that's what I wanted to do.
Well, I think one of those first sort of moments you probably realised was at the Pacific School Games. I think it was in Canberra. I think that was 2007 as well, and you won the javelin event there. I've seen various interviews and websites that say that was kind of your trigger moment. Is that how you feel, that knowing that you couldn't compete at that level, that's when you knew, okay, I can take this professional?
Yeah. So as I said, I was a discus thrower up until that point, and literally like Pacific School Games 2008, I entered to be a discus thrower, and as I said, just kind of like did javelin and shot put because they were part of the event. And yeah, I came out and I won that event, and I think I put maybe six or 7 meters on my previous javelin PB, so it was huge. And yeah, I've retold this story a few times for the listeners that haven't heard it before. Like, that was the moment for me that so wholeheartedly knew that that's what I was going to do in my career. That was the event that was going to get me to the Olympic Games. I was going to have success as a javelin thrower. And from then on in, that's my life. And it's the best decision I ever made. Like, I just knew the event just fitted me, and I just loved it.
I kind of want to go into it a bit about why javelin, because obviously kids growing up, they look at, say, in athletics in particular, they look at maybe the marquee events. You've obviously got your sprinting, your 100 meters, you've got your hurdles, you've got maybe the long distance running. Then if you look at some of the other field events, maybe you're looking more like at the high jump, the long jump, things like that. But obviously some of the throw events kind of get underrated a bit. Obviously javelin's one of them, discus, shot put, hammer throw. What kind of attracted you to that side of athletics? And was it more a case of you felt like you had a natural ability at it, or it was something you went, no, that's something that I want to try and get good at?
Yeah, probably a few different angles to this, which is really great. I think to start off with, I probably had slightly more talent in the throws events. As I said, I grew up being like a swimmer and a gymnast, so I had upper body strength there from a younger age, and I guess that helped me early on in the throws events. And I think another big part of it was we had some really great javelin throwers around at the time. So Kim Mickle and Catherine Mitchell were both world-class athletes in javelin, and were competing, performing on the international stage. And it was kind of like seeing them achieve that made me believe it was possible to do that as well. So I'm so thankful for the role models that I had in those early years. I mean, Danny Samuels as well, early days, she'd won her world title. So I think there was a combination of things that sort of like pushed me towards the javelin. But as I said, it was the way the event like just clicked for me. The way I was able to move my body around the javelin and pull the javelin, and yeah, there was just something that, yeah, felt so right about it. I guess I didn't have to work so hard to sort of like make it fit or make it feel good. And that's why, yeah, when you have that initial connection, I think with an event like that, your energy and your enthusiasm to learn and grow and, yeah, experience it is just so motivating.
Did you have anyone in particular? Obviously, you mentioned those role models, but sort of growing up when you're younger, coming through the age ranks, anyone going, no, javelin is clearly the sport for you? Were there people who were encouraging you to keep going at it?
Not particularly. I guess when I had that breakthrough year at Pacific School Games in 2008, yeah, from then on, there's definitely some encouragement to pursue it and to continue growing with it and find the right environment to train in. I think was a big one that I was encouraged to sort of set myself up with, because yeah, there's talent there maybe, but if you don't like set that up in the right environment, it's not necessarily going to continue to just be you're a talented athlete and you're going to throw well. There will come a point where you need to sort of like work at it and, you know, get your craft right. And there's elements to the javelin that's like, yes, it's technical, but there's body elements to it with like our power and our strength that all need to line up. So yeah, I'm really thankful that early days I was put in an environment at the AIS with a para throws group. I got to train alongside those guys and experience what an elite training environment was like and what it was like to go day by day in that setting, in that environment. And I'm really thankful for that opportunity because, as I said, it's like that exposure to that level really sort of set the bar for me. I'm like, all right, if you want to achieve at the top level in the world, this is sort of the daily habits you have to put into play.
I was reading your website earlier this morning, and there's a quote that I really liked in there that you said, I guess at 22, you really started to throw a long way. That like there was a moment there where everything clicked into gear. Did you notice any change that time, or did like that it just clicked into gear?
Oh, I think, this is going back to 2014 now, I think, where yeah, I sort of had my big breakout year at the Commonwealth Games. And yeah, it probably was like that was the first year where I really felt like I did step up and sort of make my mark on the international stage. And I performed well at those games and probably shocked myself a little bit, to be honest. Like first international team, and I come away with a bronze medal. But I think in one sense it kind of was like, oh wow, like, whew, okay, you've achieved this. In another sense, it was like, oh, it's what I wanted to achieve. That's what I was working towards. Now that I'm there, like, let's keep going. There's absolutely, you don't hit the brakes now. You hit that accelerator and you keep pushing, because I suppose I just saw that I was capable of so much more. And yeah, so definitely the 2014 year was a big year in terms of like exposure and development and growth for me.
Let's talk about that 2014 Com Games, because I know you had a bit of an elbow injury in the lead up. It was kind of, you not necessarily surprised yourself by making the squad, but as you said, you surprised yourself coming home with the bronze medal. What was that experience like, firstly, to sort of represent your country, to represent Australia at such a big international event, and secondly, come home with a medal from it?
Yeah, so that was a special year for me, because the previous year I had my coach at the time and myself had made the decision not to go to the World University Games, which I qualified for, but we decided that given the qualifying standard for Com Games, I was still a couple of meters off that, and we would actually be better off having a solid winter block of training to sort of feel like we would make that jump the following year. So yeah, sat down and was like, okay, cool. We're happy to say we'll pass on this World Unis to try and get the A qualifier for Com Games the following year. And it paid off, because I came out that season, January 2014, and threw 60 meters, and then a week later through 63 meters. So yeah, by all means, that was an awesome decision at the time. And I'm not saying that that's what everyone should do, but it certainly worked for me. And it meant that Commonwealth Games team, like making that team meant a lot to me. Like I'd spent years training. I had already gone through quite a significant injury in 2012 with an elbow rupture, ligament rupture. So to come back from that, to continue training, to throw well and qualify, was one of those moments in life you're like, wow, I've achieved one of those goals I originally set up for myself way back when. But I suppose it didn't stop there for me. And that's where I like to say, like, the hunger in me, like, continues each year. It's not just about making the team, but I wanted to perform well in that environment and on that world stage. So I did have an injury again that year leading into comms. I had a grade 2 MCL tear, which we sort of rehabbed leading into the games and did as much as I could without throwing. And then at the very last minute, added the throws back in. But I suppose, it was amazing. Like, the environment that you get set up at a games like that, you've got the village environment, which is all just new and exciting. And then you've got, you're wearing your country's colors, and that stadium as well. I still remember the roar that came from sitting in the middle of the stadium. I think I had to, like, block my ears at one point because I think it was the women's 800 heptathlon was finishing, and it was just this, like, mad roar from the stadium, which is why you're there. For me, that is why I'm there. That's why I'm competing, is to, like, perform in front of that crowd and show what I'm capable of doing. And I felt like I did that. I was obviously still a very young athlete in terms of my experience competing at that level, but I'd done a lot of work with my sports psychologist leading into those games to, I guess, prepare for the fact that it is going to be big, loud, lots of different stuff happening. Try and, control what you can control on the day. And I thought I did that really well, and it paid off. I threw really well and came away with a bronze medal.
I guess this would have been your first big exposure to it, but I want to ask you, how do you go with nerves? Do you get nervous in terms of any big event? Obviously, it's probably gotten a lot easier as the events go on, but say looking back to 2014 in Glasgow, do you get nervous, and were you nervous in that moment?
Yeah, I think every athlete to some degree still experience nervousness, but it probably changes over time. I think early days, the nervousness came from almost like anxiety and I guess uncertain of how I'm going to go in that day. And I suppose maybe even a little bit of, like, nervousness came from lack of confidence. And I suppose as I've gotten older and as I've experienced more and as I've learned more about myself, the nervousness is almost enjoyable now because it's meaningful. And I think that's the thing that I associate now is when I feel nervous about a competition is because it means so much to me. As I said, I'm there to perform and I'm there to showcase what I'm capable of and throw my best. That means so much to me. And that's what the nervousness is. And it's kind of nice to feel. I don't always necessarily feel nervous for some of the smaller meets I compete in now, but certainly on those big competition days, absolutely.
Well, I think something we've noticed that I'll touch on a bit later is that in the big events, you definitely do tend to step up, especially in recent years. But I guess following on from that Commonwealth Games, you sort of 2015, you spent a lot more time in Europe competing in events over there. Did you find that you kind of had to do that was the logical next step to take that progression in Javelin to the next level, just because it isn't the biggest sport here in Australia? You had to go somewhere where it's a bit more widely competed in, I guess?
Yeah, I guess a big part of athletics is the fact that you have this European circuit, and that's a really enjoyable part about being able to be a full-time athlete and experience that, because wow, the stories I have over the years of being able to do the tour is part of what makes my life so exciting and so enjoyable. So yeah, the first year, 2015, we only did quite a short stint now that I look back on it, maybe 3.5 weeks. And I think we did maybe 3 comps in that time. And yeah, that was really just a taster for it. Like that was a little like dip your toe in the water kind of feel for what Europe was like. And I really enjoyed it. So that meant that the following year, because it worked so well, it's like, okay, let's do this. Let's pull it out a little bit. Let's do a few more comps. Let's, see how it goes. So, and I mean, 2016 wasn't a great year. I had a back injury going into Rio, so we spent a lot more time at home than we probably initially planned. And again, a very short stint in Europe before going out to the Olympics. But since 2017, yeah, we've made it a priority to sort of be in Europe for those Diamond League meets and those second tier meets, and really just be fully immersed in the European summer and follow the tour.
That back injury in 2016 obviously hampered preparations for Rio, as you were talking about. After coming out of the Commonwealth Games with a medal, was the Olympics your next big thing that you had sort of circled in your calendar and gone, okay, I want to make my mark at Rio?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, looking back now, it's easy to say I probably got caught up in it a little bit. I thought I was invincible at that point in time. Like, you know, very steep curve into success in athletics with that first sort of Com Games year, and yeah, just had big dreams and big hopes, and felt like probably actually hung on to hope more than anything going into Rio, rather than actually seeing the facts for what they were, and seeing like how my body was actually training and how far I was actually throwing. I guess I was a little bit naive to that and chose to put my blinkers on a little bit because I probably didn't want to accept that I wasn't in great shape. I just sort of held on to this hope that, like, no, when the day comes, I'll be able to just make it happen. I'll pull something out of the bag, and yeah, it didn't happen. and that's the reality of it sometimes. Like, it was definitely a lesson learned for sure. And the reflection point on that year in particular was a huge part of how Mike and I then progressed from there. If we hadn't sat down and honestly reflected on how that year had gone, not only from a physical perspective, but how I approached it mentally, I can honestly say I wouldn't have had the change I had in 2017 to come back out and really feel like I was competitive in the European season.
As someone involved in athletics, obviously a lot of team sports and individual sports, even in Australia, it's all about every year there's a new competition that they can look forward to. They can they switch off for a couple of months and then they're straight back into it. But I guess for athletics, and you look at other Olympic sports, say swimming, for example, it's about that 4-year rotation almost, that you go, okay, I've sort of got to set my sights to peaking at the next Olympics. How much does that impact not necessarily just you, but sort of athletes who are involved in athletics in general, do you think?
Yeah, I think with athletics, yes, I do think we prioritize that Olympic year. And obviously it's every 4 years. So you probably look at it from a perspective like you set up your 4-year cycle and then you work back knowing that we still have a major championship each year. So we have that Com Games every 4 years as well, which sort of sits in the middle. But either side of that, we have our World Championships. And in athletics, I think for me personally, the World Championships almost sits alongside how important it is with the Olympic Games, because it's really like, again, you're competing against the best in the world in athletics in your event. So why can't that be just as important as an Olympic Games? And we certainly treat it in that manner because it's probably a little bit more business-like in the way we go about those world champs. It is only athletics. You sort of set up in a hotel more often than not, rather than a village setting. And it's really about like, okay, game on, like who's the best in the world this year? So I can totally appreciate though that there are sports that work off that 4-year cycle and they really have to wait or work towards that Olympic goal. And I feel like that would be more challenging than what we have in athletics. As I said, we really work on those 12-month cycles, knowing that a major event and a really important competition comes up for us each year.
Obviously, after 2016, after that sort of result in Rio, did it light a fire under your belly? Because clearly the results across the last sort of 4 years since Rio have been absolutely extraordinary for you.
Yes, to say the least. It lit a fire in my belly. Yeah, I didn't want to like even take the holiday break after the Olympics. I think As I've said a few times, I think in other interviews, I felt so embarrassed by my result there. And I know people kind of say like, oh no, you shouldn't, like, it's amazing, you made the Olympics, you represented Australia. And again, for me, it is so much more than that. It is what I do on the day and how I perform and how I, the body language you show on the field and stuff. And I just felt like I missed my mark on that performance. So yeah, I came home and was sort of like forced into having some time off, because I probably needed that, just from the point of view to like, okay, step back, take a breath, like let's reflect on this before we like dive into the new season. So but when I came back, yeah, I was hungry, and I was so hungry, not only to like get better physically, because there was still some strength deficits there that we needed to address, but just my hunger to learn about the event, and so eager to like challenge my body in different ways it moved and how I threw the javelin, and really wanted to become a student of the event. And yeah, that just kind of like, I took it and I ran with it. And there were some things that Mike and I sort of changed a little bit in our coach athlete dynamic as well. Like we set up some really positive structures around my throwing sessions, in terms of setting up the focus for each session and debriefing those sessions. And yeah, as I said, it definitely just took it and ran.
What specifically motivates you to sort of constantly improve on yourself? I've spoken to athletes who say they look back at past performances where they haven't done well. Like they'll look at, say, their race at the Olympics where they didn't win, or they'll do the opposite. They'll look forward and they'll go, okay, that's the date in the diary that I know I have to be at my best. But for you, what gets you out of bed on those cold, miserable days, or when it's cold and windy, to go, okay, I need to train, I need to get better?
Yeah, it's probably that long-term motivation, that knowing each day kind of counts towards that end goal. And I often talk about trusting the process and knowing that, yeah, each and every day counts towards this end goal, which might be months away. But it's the work you do now that you kind of like chip away at. And then in a few months' time, you sort of notice the progress you've had from the work you've done back there. And you can kind of continually work towards this goal, this moment, this competition. And I feel like I've certainly had moments where motivation does flatten out a little bit. I think this last year especially, I felt the most challenged in terms of that daily motivation, or sort of like that drive to just like get up and go. That's hard for me, because I've never really felt like that before. I've always sort of felt like, yes, today's a new day, like go for it, hit it hard, like get stuck in. So I can appreciate that there are some tougher days, and they're the days where you sort of like have to step back for a moment and just, I guess for me, it was about reflecting on my reason why I was doing it. That was a big part of it. And not only the goals I'd set out in terms of podium finishes and rankings in the sport, but the bigger picture of like, I'm in this to also be a role model to young athletes. I want to walk away from the sport feeling I've had an influence on the younger generation coming through, whether they're younger generation of javelin throwers or a young kid who wants to pursue a sport in netball, women's AFL, like whatever it may be. I want to feel like I have a positive influence on that. And if I can get up and train today, and someone sees me doing that when life's not going so well, that has a positive influence over the people around me.
Yeah, that's very poignant. I think especially considering the year that we've had in 2020 in terms of just sport around the world has been cancelled. Obviously for you personally, the Olympics would have been a massive goal that kind of got put aside. But after that 2016 success, we sort of saw you continually beating your personal best at tournaments sort of all around Europe. So as you mentioned, that sort of drive to be better was clearly working. Was there a point in terms of maybe it was before or after the 2018 Com Games where you kind of went, okay, I know now that I'm close to being one of the best in the world. Like, I know that I can fully compete on the world stage.
Yeah, I think actually the 2018 year was a really interesting year for me because we obviously had Commonwealth Games early. It was a really quick turnaround from World Championships in 2017 to Coms in 2018. And yeah, I sort of like took the results that I had in 2017 and we kind of just like rode through. We didn't really have much of a big strength block. We kind of just kept riding through into the 2018 year. And I had a good result in Com Games, finished second behind Catherine, who had an outstanding competition, credit to her. But then I went to Europe and actually fell in a bit of a lull. I think maybe having held in that competition space for so long, I'd probably burnt out a little bit and hadn't recognized it in myself. So I had some shocking comps in Europe that year. And as I said, just kind of like, yeah, fell a bit flat and was like, oh no, the wheels have come off. What's happened? I've forgotten how to be a javelin thrower. So sort of like came back from Europe, and then later in that year, we still had Continental Cup, which I ended up going back to Europe for. And it was sort of like another moment where it's like, okay, we're having a second bite at here. Like, let's go over, let's regroup, let's have a cracker when we come back into the last couple of meets of the year. And again, I didn't have an outstanding Continental Cup meet, but I think that was the moment for me where it was like, I know I'm capable of more. Like, I haven't yet shown what I can do on the international stage. So I guess coming back from that comp again, I still sort of had this like fire burning away. And it was like, I almost kind of approached it in like, oh, I know what I need to do now. Like, there was just something there, something burning that was like, yeah, okay, let's go. This is what I have to do. This is how we're going to do it. And yeah, again, kind of like just full steam ahead into 2019.
2019 is, as you say, it's when it kind of all started for you. I mean, there was the Oceania Athletic Championships where I think you finally broke that sort of 65, I think it was 65.6 or something barrier that got you the gold there. Then you sort of improved that as well, and I think you threw a 67 in Luzerne as well. Like, how did you keep finding ways to just, you were adding almost meters at a time?
Yeah, so I mean, I had since 2017 sort of been peppering the 64-meter line, and it was awesome because the consistency was there. But I also felt like, okay, my consistency is here now. There should be something there. It should be another level. So I was almost just like, I guess, patient enough to like just keep working at it and not forcing the throws when I got the opportunity to compete. And yes, that Townsville meet, that to throw 65, I was like, yes, we've broken the 64-meter barrier. Like, we're going somewhere here. And I suppose that just gave me all the confidence in the world to take overseas. Like, I think it was only a week later that I sort of was in my first Diamond League again. And I think there I threw 65 as well. So, I mean, to go back-to-back 65-meter throws in pretty like significant competitions, just keep riding that wave. And the thing that worked so well for me in 2019 was my feel for the event, my feel for the javelin, and the way I moved my body was just so clear in my mind that even if my legs were a little bit flat on a day, I could still figure out the positions I needed to hit to throw far. And same if my back was a little bit tired or my shoulder was a little bit sore, it was kind of like, yeah, but I just have such good sense of what I need to do that I'll just make it happen. And that's a really empowering place to be as well, because you're not always going to feel amazing for a competition. You don't know what's going to get thrown to you on the day. So you just make it work. And that's the sort of attitude I had going into World Champs. And I mean, we didn't have a great timetable for that championships either. We had the qualifying and then final was 24 hours later, which in the world of javelin, you just don't do. You don't throw back-to-back days. But as I said, I think I just had developed the skills through that season to just like take it as it comes and roll with it. as I said, control the controllables, yeah, made it work.
Let's talk about Doha now, because that was a pretty special moment for you. I mean, it obviously starts in qualifying. 12 athletes qualify for the final. I think you qualified in 10th. So not like you were sneaking in, but you were on sort of the cusp there of making that final. What were your feelings like at that point? Because I think you sort of hit 61 or so on your first throw, but were you going, I know I could do so much more than this?
Yeah, oh my goodness, what the worst 45 minutes of my life waiting for that second pull. So, yeah, I mean, I'd opened my series with 61 or maybe just over 60, and I was kind of like, okay, like it's a good start, but that's not going to get me into the final. And then I just didn't quite hit my rhythm on the runway that day. So, yeah, like 60 is not terrible, but it's also not like, yeah, that's really cutting it fine to make a final for a world championship. So, and I was the first thrower in the pool as well. So in that last round, I had to wait for 15 other girls to throw before I even like walked off the field. And I remember looking at Mike a couple times, my hands on my head, like shaking my head, being like, this is it, I'm done for. Like these girls are throwing past me. So I remember walking off and just feeling so frustrated with myself, being like, damn, that wasn't good enough. Like I'm in a really precarious position here, like in 5th, and you've got the second pool coming out. And I was just like, oh, it's just so annoyed. So we like went back and started like cooling down, preparing for the next day. And I was preparing as if I'd made the final. That was what I was going to do. And if I found out otherwise, then we'll deal with it at that point. But they had the second pool on the big screen in the area that I was sort of cooling down. And it was the first time in my life that I would ever say, why did you have to show the javelin? Because I just didn't want to know what was happening, because it was just so nerve-wracking. And I think I made it through till about halfway through the last round. And then I got up and I started pacing. And I was just like walking laps of this indoor area, just like waiting to find out if I'd made the cut. And then Mike comes over, just like sheer relief on his face. And he was like, you're in 10th. It's okay. And again, it was just kind of one of those moments we looked at each other and we were like, okay, we know there are things in that like qualification that we need to unpack, but tonight's not the time to do it. Like we are going to put that aside and talk about that on another day, because right now you need to prepare for the final. And we both know that you are capable of so much more than what you showed tonight. And that was it. Like that was the debrief for that day, because we both agreed that there was just like, no, you just missed the mark today. There's nothing wrong with you. You've like threw 67 like a month ago. So take that energy and take that feel into tomorrow night. Done, cool. You know, like wipe your hands of that comp. Don't even have to think about it. You got comp day tomorrow. Let's go. So
how was that sort of 24 hours leading into the final? Obviously, as you said, you've put the qualification to the side, but what goes into the preparation for a final like that when you know, okay, it's all even again, it's just there's 12 of us, that's all there is, I've just got to beat 11 other people and I get the gold? Is it just really simple that you simplify that preparation?
I guess it is that simple at that point in time. Like, yeah, you're going in there, you know the girls that you're competing against, and it's a competition to see who can throw the furthest. So you're going to throw far, I'm going to throw further. Like I do love that about the event. Like you asking me to step up and show more. Like there's an element of that in the last couple of years, which I've really enjoyed. I enjoy the challenge. So yeah, I guess the first part of that that final is like you have to make the top 8, I guess, to get a crack at the last 3 throws. I think I opened up with 63 and I was kind of like, yep, cool. Like first part of this is done. I kind of know I'm in it now. I'm amongst it. I'm sort of like, I'm in the mix, but now we got to lift. We got to find something else here. And I sort of sat, I think, in 4th, pretty much the whole comp. After that first throw, I didn't really move much, like in the order of things. And then I think it was around 5 came, and Cara Winger, the American, had thrown just before me, and she threw past me. And I remember looking at Mike and being like, no, not today. And I came out and threw further than her, but still only into 4th position. And we'd made an adjustment on the runway going into that 5th round as well. We sort of like brought my run up back a little bit just to give me some more space on the runway. So I wasn't, because what Mike had seen was I was sort of like cramping the line a little bit and just pulling off the throw a fraction. So we came back, had my throw, and I looked at him and I was like, oh yeah, that was close. That I like that one. Like that was nearly it. And I think in that space, in that moment, I sort of like, it would have happened like instantaneously, but if I slow it down, it was kind of like I stopped and I went, yep, this position, that position, put the hand there, arm there, oh, yep. And I kind of like moved my body in the way I wanted to throw in that 6th round. And then I just like locked it in, just like, you know, lock, throw the key away. I know what I'm going to do in that 6th and final round. So yeah, and then stepping up into that final throw, I was so relaxed and so confident in what I was about to do that I actually can't recall my throw. Of what I remember of that moment was I remember asking the crowd for a clap, and I turned around and I sort of like closed my eyes and I just like visualized that throw one more time, like felt all this like, I guess, suppleness in my body. I took off. And the next thing I remember is the javelin kind of like snapping out my fingers. And I think those are the throws that are just the best because they're so effortless, and yet you've hit them the furthest they've nearly ever gone. So yeah, everything just felt right. All just worked in sequence, and yeah, the result spoke for itself in the end.
When the javelin leaves your hand, can you feel the difference between a sort of a 61, 62 like you hit around qualifying in the early rounds and the 66 or so that you threw to win the event? Can you feel that difference?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I think both my 67 and my 66 meter throws, I let them go and was like, oh, that felt nice. And it's just, yeah, and just the way you can see the javelin fly, I guess is what is so cool about our event as well, is that we actually get to see what we've just created and see the outcome kind of like happening. So yeah, I saw the javelin flying and I'd hit it really clean, so you could only really see the tail of the javelin flying through the air. And I was like, oh, that's going. Oh yeah, that felt good. So yeah, distinct difference between those throws and like a 62 or a 63 meter throw for sure.
You still have to wait, I guess, at that stage a little bit. The two Chinese athletes have been performing pretty well so far. What are the emotions like at that stage, knowing that you've just produced this incredible, I think, 3 meters on your best so far that tournament? How do you feel sort of sitting, waiting there when you see your name suddenly go up to number 1 on the leaderboard?
Yeah, I think I certainly had an early celebration. As if anyone has watched the video or seen some of the photos that came out, I think I was just so excited by what I had just thrown in that stadium that my emotions kind of just took over. It was a bit of a roller coaster. And then I had this realization that it was like, oh, the comp's not over yet. Like there's still, I think at that point when I'd realized Kristen had already thrown. So it was kind of like, oh, yeah, there's still 2 more athletes to go here. So like, just pump the brakes a little bit. Like you can enjoy this moment, but like, just wait and see how everything sort of like plays out. And then you kind of go from being like, oh, I'm in a medal to being like, oh, I'm in the silver medal. And then when that last throw kind of came out and I'd realized that she hadn't thrown any further, it was like, oh my goodness, I'm a world champion. And then it was like, yeah, running to the fence to try and like celebrate with Mike and Craig Hilliard, and Matt Denny was on the fence as well watching. So yeah, it was like trying to celebrate with those guys, the realization of everything that's just happened. And the girls were incredible. Like they all came around and like gave me a hug and congratulated me. And that's really special when you know that they're your competitors, but you can still encourage each other and enjoy each other's victories. Like that really made it special for me, and I'm really grateful that I can compete against such amazing girls.
Something that I really enjoyed in your celebrations, very quick to find an Australian flag to don while you were celebrating. Can you quickly talk me through, because I've always been fascinated by this. Is there someone there with an Australian flag ready for that? Or do you just, in that moment, do you just see someone with an Australian flag and go, can I grab that? Can I borrow it?
No, our team staff are very sneaky. They carry flags in their bags just in case. So yeah, someone, as soon as I had sort of like thrown my final throw, they'd already pulled the flag out and they were like waiting. And then I ran over and someone like tossed it to me straight away. So yeah, it's all pre-planned to some degree.
So you've won the gold medal. Can you talk me through some of the reaction from your friends and family, and then coming back home, coming home as a world champion? I guess that would have been obviously something you dreamt of and something you thought you could achieve, but suddenly it had happened.
Yeah. The realization of that actually like coming to fruition is a totally different sense. And yeah, the number of messages and phone calls and stuff that I received was overwhelming, I guess, in the first 24 hours. Like there was just so much happening that, like I think I got 2 hours sleep that night, because the time difference back home meant that when I had like finished and done a few interviews, it was like first thing in the morning in Australia. So I had a few radio interviews, like morning drive, and then it was kind of like, okay, well, mum and dad are awake now, so get on the phone to them and call them, and then it's like other friends kind of messaging. So it was a bit of a blur actually, but yeah, got up the next day. And really, I think some of the best advice I guess I got from Sally Pearson the last few years was, in those moments, make sure you take time to just enjoy them. Like you don't know when they're going to happen again. And as much as you work towards those goals in your athletics career, make sure you don't miss out on enjoying them. So that whole day, I tried to just like stay really present in what I was doing and just like enjoy the fact that I was being asked to relive that amazing moment the night before. And talk about the throw, talk about the competition, and yes, soak all in, essentially. Doesn't matter how tired you are, you can sleep the next day.
Obviously, at the time, you're probably thinking, oh, this has me perfectly placed for the Tokyo Olympics. I'm world champion going into an Olympic year. You mentioned there about having time to enjoy it. I bet even you wouldn't have thought you'd have the best part, I guess, of 18 months to sit back and enjoy and make the most of the moment. Am I right in saying that you really haven't competed since Doha?
Really haven't. That was my last competition. Yeah, I was meant to come out the start of last year, and our Brisbane Track Classic, I think, was scheduled for the first week in March. And that was essentially the same week that everything sort of like dominoed with our COVID stuff in Australia. So yes, it's been a long time. I have such mixed emotions about last year, because I certainly felt like I was on top of the world. I was at the top of my game, and I just wanted to continue that into what 2020 was supposed to be, like a really big year. And, you know, we had sat down and planned out our entire schedule for the year and where we were going to travel to and how we were going to get there, and these comps into Tokyo and then come back to Europe and compete there. And it, on paper, it looked amazing. And it was like, yeah, I get to enjoy this as a world champion. But it didn't play out that way. And there are some times when, I get, I guess, frustrated by that or upset by it. But I think 2020 also gave me the opportunity to, kind of grow as an athlete a little bit. There are certainly some elements of last year that, some self-growth stuff that I don't think I necessarily would have got if I'd been out competing the whole time. And I think it makes me stronger into coming into my competitions this year. There's a lot from last year that hopefully, on top of the really good like strength and technical work we've done, I can be a better competitor. I can get the best out of myself again in any competition. And that's I guess the type of athlete I want to be. Like if you see my name on a piece of paper for a competition, you're like, oh, damn, like, I'm going to throw well and I'm going to challenge you. That's the sort of presence I guess I want to have in the athletics community and in the world of women's javelin.
There was a lot of talk last year whether the Olympics would go ahead with COVID. I mean, it was there was, I think, about a fortnight period where the Australian Olympic Committee, the IOC were like, no, we'll still be fine. We'll go ahead. We're not going to postpone. The decision gets made to postpone.
Yeah.
How do you feel in that moment? Obviously, you said you've had mixed emotions about 2020, but specifically when you hear that the Olympics probably the moment that you've peaked at, I guess, that you've come off a world championship win into an Olympic year, that kind of gets taken away with no absolute certainty that everything's going to be going ahead in 2021. How do you feel at that moment?
Yeah, I think I felt like my emotions were put through a washing machine there for those 2 weeks. Like you sort of like conversations come out that, oh no, they're standing strong, like Tokyo will go ahead. And then you start making plans for what that'll look like without the travel. And then you start hearing things like, oh no, the AOC have decided they're not going to send a team even if it's held. So then it's like, oh, okay, gee, that's a bummer. Like, not going to go to the Olympics. And then obviously I think because that was starting to happen to a few countries, the decision was then made to postpone the Olympics. And I 100% agree that that was the best decision they could have made. I think it just all gave us certainty that, okay, that was the decision. We now know what 2020 is going to look like. And we start planning for 2021 Tokyo Olympic Games. So I suppose it was just, it's the uncertainty in our lives and in those competition schedules that make it, or can tug us in different directions, I guess, and pull our emotions in different directions if we aren't quite able to say like, okay, this is what's happening. And I suppose that's a lot of what the challenge is around COVID is. It is so unpredictable that our plans have to be really fluid, and we have to be comfortable knowing that we have to be fluid with that. And yeah, that in itself it does take a lot of it can take a lot of energy and a lot of I guess understanding to be comfortable in that state. Because as an athlete, I guess, and me personally, I like to see a calendar and I like to see what I'm working towards and the dates that we have. I like to be planned and organized. And that's part of my personality, but it's also part of my life as an athlete. So yeah, that has been one of the compromises, I guess, of everything that's going on at the moment, is to sort of be comfortable in that almost competition state of mind where you're happy to just roll with it every day, day by day, knowing that, yes, there's an end goal here at some point. How we get there might look very different to how we initially planned it, but we trust the process.
I guess you were still able to kind of make the most of 2020 in terms of training at the AAS and things like that. But one thing I wanted to point out in particular was you kind of helped with this program, the check-in with your coach program that you kind of worked with the AAS and mental health. And just how important do you think it was last year? I'm sure you would have spoken to not only a lot of other coaches, but a lot of other athletes who are affected by COVID-19 disruptions to talk with each other and have these honest conversations, because a lot of athletes would be focusing on 2020 as their year. They'd be going, this is my year to shine. And when that all gets taken away from them, it would have been really hard. What sort of did you find when you had conversations with people about last year's disruptions?
Yeah, I think that it was really important to make sure that people were talking about it and talking about it in an honest manner. Like, be genuine about your conversations and about how you're feeling, because then you find it's relatable. There were other athletes out there feeling the same way and, struggling with the same points that you were. And I think sometimes we can get caught out a little bit with trying to put on a brave face and trying to show that things are okay and we're doing all right and we're working hard at the same thing. But in the background, you're sort of like, oh, I just don't quite feel the same. I don't quite feel grounded or motivated, as I mentioned a couple of times. So yeah, having those connections with other athletes certainly made that easier. Again, it was just relatable. People who had the same goals and were having the same challenges. So really important to talk to them. But I think it also made it like the awareness came out that it wasn't just the athletes that we needed to check in with. There was the coaches and the support staff, and, you know, the bubble expands a little bit, I guess, when you're making sure that you check in with other people. And, you know, I think I definitely developed some stronger bonds with some friends over last year, because I guess I let them in a little bit more onto like what was happening in my life and how it was affecting me as an athlete. And, you know, my family bonds certainly got stronger. So there are elements of last year which I'm really thankful for, because I've got some awesome support networks now moving forward that will maybe include a few more people than they did in previous years.
We're obviously in 2021 now. It's hopefully a new year. We're turning over a new leaf, and the Olympics look set to go ahead. I mean, I guess firstly, how are you feeling in terms of preparation for the Olympics, and how are you feeling in terms of the Olympics? Are you feeling like it's still going to be a good event going over there, that it's going to be a level playing field? And do you still feel, I guess, safe isn't the right word, but feel like that all the precautions will be taken to make sure that the Olympics go ahead successfully?
Yeah, I certainly feel like they're doing the best they can to have as safe as possible games. And as you say, taking all the precautions into allowing the athletes to be there and to compete. I think there's still so many unknowns in terms of like how we get there, and trying to not spend too much time trying to work out what those could look like or what they could be. But knowing that, yes, we'll have an Olympic Games. It'll look very different to previous games, but you get to compete, you get to go out there and you get to show what you can do. So that's what I'm holding on to at the moment. I know what my goal is in Tokyo, and I know how I want to be, how I want to compete, what I want to do. So yeah, I'm feeling really good about the process at the moment. And I'm actually looking forward to, I should be competing in just under a month now. So get back out there, put my comp singlet back on and have a throw in competition. So that'll really allow me to see how I've gone over the past year, where I'm sort of sitting, and allow Mike and I to assess what it is that we need to address going into those few months leading into the Olympic Games. So there's still too many unknowns to give a very clear picture on what this year is going to look like. But as I said, I have an end goal, which is gold in Tokyo, and that's what I'm working towards.
You obviously used the crowd to give you a bit of a clap for that final throw in Doha. How are you going to go if there's no crowd in Tokyo?
That is definitely one of the things I'm going to have to work on with my sports psych, because I love the atmosphere of those big stadiums, and that's probably the one thing that maybe scares me a little bit about not having any crowd, and just how that affects the atmosphere and what that sort of does to the competition. So yeah, we've drawn up a few elements of what could be different about this game, and how are we going to address those, or how are we going to best prepare for what could potentially come up. And no spectators is definitely one of those things.
One of the last things I want to touch on is, across the last sort of 2-3 years, and obviously on the back of your success in Doha, you've become one of the real front, or the leaders of the women's sports movement that has really grown so dramatically in Australia. I feel like not just in the last couple of years, but across the last sort of 2 decades, really. But in the last 3-4 years as well, we've seen a really big movement towards giving women's sport the support and the coverage it needs. And I think we're seeing the rewards of that. What have you seen in terms of growth in terms of women's sport? You're obviously involved in athletics, which has had a really good background of women's sport and encouraging and promoting female athletes. But have you noticed anything in particular in the sort of the last 4 or 5 years where you've been competing at such a high level in particular?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think the last few years we've seen a massive push for support in women's sport, which is so great to see, because I guess coming from an athletics background, there has always sort of been, I guess, a little bit more equality in terms of like male and female, and even again, take it internationally when we're on the circuit overseas, there's always been a really good balance and good support for the female athletes around there, regardless of the event they're in, which is even better. Like I think I'm in full support of continually like growing this movement, because yes, it got a little bit of momentum, but let's not stop there. Let's continue to encourage it, and let's continue to support it. Let's see it grow, because when we see it grow, we see more depth in it, which then, you know, brings the levels up and makes it more competitive. And yeah, I'd love to see more like females just continue in sport through their later teenage years into early 20s, late 20s and on. Like, yeah, I think there's just more avenues for young girls to pursue different sports now, which I think is really awesome. Like, it doesn't just have to be recreational. There's a few avenues now where they're starting to go more elite or more pro, which is great, because we want people to live active lifestyles. And if they want to pursue sport, they now have the opportunity to go and do that across the board. There's not just one or two sports that they can do that in. And yeah, from an athletics point of view, the same thing applies. Like, if we can have more girls stay in the sport, then we sort of, the talent pool's there, the competitiveness is there, and then suddenly you sort of like raise the bar, the depth is there, and then, you know, suddenly we're filling teams every year with like 3 javelin throwers, and there's a few like nipping at the heels to make teams. That is an awesome environment to sort of set up for athletics in Australia.
The final question I ask everyone when I chat to them, it could potentially draw on this in terms of what you've seen in the growth in the sport, but it could be anything. What are you most proud of in your career so far?
Oh. I mean, it's hard to say I'm not proud of my win at Doha, but I like to think that I've set an example of a young girl who had a dream of one day representing Australia, and really prioritizing that dream and sort of like being very determined in the way I went about it, to follow that passion, to continue that passion, to continue to grow, to put myself in the right environment, to have success. And I think I'm proud of that story. And I like to think that that story will continue to grow, and I'll have more to show over the years. Because if I can walk away from the sport feeling as though I've had influence over someone in the sporting world, and they feel like they've, you know, continued their sport, passionate about sport because they've seen me just do it, not necessarily have success in it, I feel like that's a bonus, but to just enjoy doing what I do, that would probably be my proudest moment.
Well, I know for one, I can't wait to see your story continue. Hopefully it's in Tokyo this year. I mean, obviously, as you said, there's a lot of things to unfold before that happens, but look, fingers crossed for you that your preparations can lead straight into that gold medal in Tokyo in July and August. Kelsey, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for letting me share my story.